The spring air in Washington felt heavy with tension. Not the usual kind that hung around the city's marble buildings and busy streets, but something different, something that made even the most experienced political players look over their shoulders more often. Karoline Leavitt wiped a drop of coffee from her desk as she scanned the morning news alerts on her phone. At 30 years old, she was the youngest person ever to serve as White House press secretary, a fact that newspapers never failed to mention. 3 months into the job, and already she'd faced more challenges than most people would in a lifetime. Another request from Maddow's team, called out Jen, her assistant, walking in with a stack of papers. Third one this week. Karoline looked up, pushing her long brown hair behind her ear. They don't give up easily, do they? Nope. Guess that's why she's still around after all these years. Karoline took the paper and read through the formal interview request. Rachel Maddow, one of the most respected and feared journalists in the business, wanted a one-on-one for her new special report. Most press secretaries would find a polite way to decline. Maddow was known for her tough questions and for catching people off guard. But Karoline wasn't most press secretaries. "Tell them yes," she said, surprising even herself a little. Jen nearly dropped the rest of the papers. "Seriously? You want to do this?" "I do," Karoline said, a small smile forming. "But on our terms, and I want the whole day clear before the interview." Down across town, in a studio office with large windows overlooking the Potomac River, Rachel Maddow sat surrounded by research documents. At 52, she'd seen administrations come and go, had watched scandals unfold and careers end. These days she only appeared on TV once a week, spending most of her time digging deeper into stories for her investigative podcast. She said yes, her producer Tom announced, walking in without knocking. Leavitt actually agreed to the interview. Rachel looked up, her reading glasses perched on the end of her nose. "You're kidding." "Not even a little bit. Her office just called. They had a few conditions, but nothing major." Rachel leaned back in her chair. This was unexpected. In her 25 years as a journalist, she'd learned that when something seemed too good to be true, it usually was. "What's her game?" she wondered out loud. Tom shrugged. "Maybe she thinks she can handle you." "Nobody thinks that," Rachel said, but without any real arrogance. It was simply a fact. Her interview preparation was legendary. She must have something planned. Over the next 2 weeks, Washington buzzed with gossip about the upcoming interview. Political reporters wrote endless speculation pieces. Cable news talking heads debated what might happen when these two women, representing completely opposite political worlds, finally sat down together. Karoline appeared calm through it all. During her daily press briefings, she fielded questions with her usual mix of sharpness and charm. If the upcoming Maddow interview was making her nervous, she didn't show it. But behind the scenes, she was preparing something big. Late one evening, after most White House staff had gone home, Karoline sat in her office with her most trusted advisor, an older man named Robert who had worked in politics for 4 decades. "Are you absolutely sure about this approach?" he asked, pointing to the folder on her desk. "Once you go this route, there's no taking it back." Karoline picked up the folder, feeling its weight in her hands. Inside was information that could change everything, recordings that nobody knew existed. "I'm sure," she said firmly. "They've been pushing their version of the story for months. It's time people heard the truth." Robert looked concerned. "The fallout will be enormous, not just for them, but possibly for you too." "Sometimes you have to take risks," Karoline replied, tucking the folder into her bag. "Besides, she's going to come at me with everything she's got. I need to be ready." As the interview day drew closer, Rachel also stepped up her preparation. Her team dug through thousands of pages of documents, looking for inconsistencies in policies, conflicting statements, anything that might reveal problems in the administration. "This is solid," her researcher Danny said, pointing to a particular set of documents. "There's a clear contradiction between what they said in January and what they're doing now." Rachel nodded. "Good. Add it to the main questions, and make sure we have all the dates and quotes double-checked." The night before the interview, Both women found themselves unable to sleep. Karoline stood by her apartment window looking out at the city lights, rehearsing how she would handle each expected question. The recordings in her possession were powerful, but timing would be everything. Across town, Rachel sat at her kitchen table, going through her notes one more time. 25 years of journalism experience told her something unexpected was coming. Leavitt had agreed too easily, seemed too confident. "Whatever you're planning," Rachel whispered to herself, "I'll be ready." What neither woman realized was that their encounter would become one of the most talked about political moments of the year. Not because of the conflict everyone expected, but because of what would happen when those secret recordings finally came to light. Morning light filtered through the blinds as Karoline's alarm went off at 5:30 a.m. She'd barely slept 4 hours, but today wasn't about comfort. Today was about being prepared. She moved quietly through her morning routine, choosing a navy blue suit that projected both confidence and professionalism. As she pinned her White House badge to her lapel, her phone buzzed with a text from Robert. "Car will be there at 7. Everything's ready." The streets of D.C. were already busy as her black SUV made its way across town. Karoline watched the familiar landmarks pass by, mentally rehearsing key points. The folder with the recording sat in her briefcase along with 3 other folders containing backup documentation. "Nervous?" asked Mike, her security detail, catching her eye in the rear view mirror. "Focused," she replied. It wasn't entirely true, but admitting to nerves wouldn't help anyone. Across town at the studio, things were already chaotic. Rachel had arrived an hour earlier than usual, wanting to review the setup herself. The interview would take place in Studio B, with its dark blue backdrop and comfortable chairs arranged to create the illusion of a casual conversation, though nothing about this meeting would be casual. "We've had to rearrange security 3 times this morning," complained Danny, looking harried as she handed Rachel a fresh cup of coffee. "The White House team is insisting on checking every inch of the place." Rachel nodded, understanding the protocol. "Let them do their thing. We want everything by the book today." Tom burst into the room, his tie slightly askew. "They're 20 minutes out, and they've requested that all phones be left outside the studio during the interview." "That's unusual," Rachel said, raising an eyebrow. "They're citing security protocols, but I've never heard of this requirement before." Rachel considered this. "Fine, we'll comply. But make sure our recording equipment is double-checked. I don't want any technical issues during the interview." By 8:45, the studio hallways were filled with serious-looking people in dark suits, earpieces firmly in place. The White House security team moved with quiet efficiency, checking every corner, every piece of equipment. At 9:02, a small commotion at the entrance signaled Karoline's arrival. She walked in, flanked by 2 aides, a tall woman with short blonde hair carrying several folders, and a middle-aged man with glasses who stayed glued to his phone. The studio staff watched with undisguised curiosity as the press secretary was escorted to the green room. Unlike most guests who appeared nervous or fidgety before facing Rachel Maddow, Karoline seemed remarkably composed. Inside the green room, Karoline declined coffee but accepted water. As a makeup artist touched up her face, she flipped through her notes one last time. "Ms. Leavitt," said a young production assistant with a clipboard. "Just to confirm, the interview will focus primarily on recent policy changes and their implications." Karoline looked up and smiled slightly. "I'm counting on it." The assistant looked surprised at her confidence, then nodded and left. As soon as the door closed, Karoline turned to her aides. "Lisa, make sure the audio equipment we brought is ready. Blake, give me one more rundown of what we expect her to ask." Blake adjusted his glasses. Based on her recent shows and social media activity, she'll likely start with the border situation, pivot to the economic package, and then try to catch you on the healthcare statements from last month. Karoline nodded. "And that's when I'll bring up the recordings." Lisa looked concerned. "Are you sure about the timing? We could wait until she brings up the senator directly." "No," Karoline said firmly. "We control the narrative. I want her off balance before she can build momentum." Meanwhile, Rachel was in her office having her own final preparation. Her producer Tom sat across from her reviewing their strategy. "We've got her on at least 3 contradictions," Tom said. "The February statement doesn't match what they're doing now, and we have the documents to prove it." Rachel nodded, but something was bothering her. Why did she agree to this interview, and why the unusual requests about recording equipment and phones? Tom shrugged. "Power play? Making us jump through hoops?" "Maybe," Rachel said, not convinced. "Or maybe she's bringing something we don't know about." Tom checked his watch. 15 minutes to air. Want to meet her before we start?" "Briefly," Rachel said. "Just the usual handshake. I want to see her body language." The hallway meeting was cordial but tense. Both women smiled professionally as they shook hands. "Thank you for making time for us," Rachel said. "Happy to be here," Karoline replied. "I think it's important for the American people to hear the full story." Something in her tone made Rachel pause. The phrase, "full story," carried weight. As they were escorted to their respective final preparations, Rachel whispered to Tom, "She's definitely got something planned." Tom nodded. "Well, so do we." The studio lights came on, bathing everything in a professional glow. Camera operators took their positions. Sound technicians made final adjustments. A makeup artist made a last touch to Rachel's face. 30 seconds, called the floor director. Karoline and Rachel took their seats across from each other. Between them lay an unseen battlefield of preparation, strategy, and political maneuvering. Both women appeared calm, but beneath the surface both were mentally preparing for every possible scenario. 10 seconds, called the director. Rachel glanced at her notes one last time. Karoline subtly touched the folder beside her. 5, 4, 3. The director's hand signals counted down the final seconds. Rachel turned to the camera with her signature expression of serious inquiry, unaware that in less than 30 minutes, this interview would take a turn that nobody in the studio, except perhaps Karoline Leavitt, could possibly predict. "Welcome to a special edition of our program," Rachel began, her voice carrying the measured tone that had made her famous. "Today we're joined by White House Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt." The camera panned to show both women seated across from each other. Karoline nodded in acknowledgement, her posture straight but not stiff. "Thank you for having me," she said. Rachel jumped right in. "Let's start with the administration's recent shift on border policy. In January, the president stated that there would be no changes to the existing framework. Yet by March we saw a complete overhaul. How do you explain this contradiction?" It was the opening question everyone expected, direct and challenging. Karoline had rehearsed this answer dozens of times. "I wouldn't call it a contradiction," she replied smoothly. "I'd call it a response to changing conditions. When new information emerges, good leadership adapts." Rachel wasn't letting go that easily. But the statements were definitive. The president said, and I'm quoting here, "No changes are coming to our border approach." That's not leaving room for adaptation. For the next 20 minutes, they went back and forth on various policies: healthcare, the economy, foreign relations. With each topic, Rachel pushed harder, presenting documentation of what she saw as clear contradictions. The studio crew, watching from behind cameras, could feel the tension building. This was exactly the kind of interview viewers tuned in for. Tough questions met with careful answers, a verbal chess match between skilled opponents. But something felt off. Karoline seemed too comfortable, as if she was waiting for something. Her responses, while professional, didn't have the defensive edge typically seen when press secretaries were cornered on difficult topics. When the discussion turned to recent economic sanctions, Rachel made her move. "Let's talk about the Gordon situation," she said, referring to Senator Alan Gordon, one of the administration's most vocal critics. Last week, he presented documents suggesting the administration misled Congress about the impact of these sanctions. These are serious allegations. Rachel opened a folder, pulling out several pages of what appeared to be financial analyses. According to these reports, which Senator Gordon made public, your office knew about potential negative impacts on American manufacturing, but deliberately withheld that information. How do you respond? There was a brief moment of silence. Anyone watching closely might have noticed the slight smile that flickered across Karoline's face. Before I answer that, Karoline said calmly, I think it's important for your viewers to have some context about Senator Gordon's claims. She reached for the folder beside her, pulling out what looked like a small digital recorder. With your permission, I'd like to play something. Rachel hesitated, then nodded. This was unusual, but not unprecedented. Go ahead. Karoline pressed play. A male voice, immediately recognizable as Senator Gordon's, filled the studio. Of course, I know the sanctions won't hurt manufacturing. The recording played clearly. But we can spin it that way. The administration is vulnerable on the economy. If we push this narrative hard enough, their numbers will drop before midterms. Another voice asked, even though our own analysis shows the opposite? Who cares what the analysis shows? Gordon replied. It's about perception. We need a story that sticks, and this one will. Karoline stopped the recording and looked directly at Rachel. This conversation took place 3 days before Senator Gordon released those documents you just referenced. The studio went completely silent. Even the camera operators exchanged glances. Rachel's expression shifted from professional intensity to genuine surprise. Where did you get this recording? She asked. It was captured during a meeting at the Embassy of France, where Senator Gordon was speaking with his staff, unaware that the room's security system was active. As part of diplomatic protocol, those recordings were shared with our national security team. Rachel took a moment, processing what she'd just heard. Her research team had spent weeks building a case around Gordon's allegations. If this recording was authentic, and she had no reason to believe it wasn't, it completely undermined that narrative. Do you have verification that this recording is genuine? She asked, buying time to recalibrate. Full authentication from 3 independent sources, Karoline replied, pulling out additional documents, plus 2 more recordings from subsequent meetings where similar strategies were discussed. Rachel looked at the papers Karoline handed her, scanning them quickly. Her producer was making frantic gestures from behind the camera, but Rachel wasn't looking in that direction. So you're saying Senator Gordon deliberately misled the public about these sanctions? Rachel clarified. I'm not making that claim, Karoline said. The recording speaks for itself. For perhaps the first time in her broadcasting career, Rachel Maddow was momentarily without words. She had built her reputation on thorough research and preparation, yet somehow this critical information had eluded her team completely. Well, Rachel finally said, with a small shake of her head. This certainly changes the context of our discussion. And then, to everyone's surprise, especially the studio crew who had never seen this before, Rachel began to laugh. Not nervously, but genuinely, appreciatively. I have to say, Ms. Leavitt, in 25 years of journalism, I've rarely been caught this off guard. Karoline allowed herself a small smile. The truth often surprises us all. You could have led with this, Rachel pointed out, still chuckling at the unexpected turn. Would you have believed it without hearing the context first? Karoline asked. Rachel considered this, then shook her head. Probably not. Well played. The producer was frantically signaling that they should go to break, but Rachel held up a hand to stop him. The moment was too genuine to interrupt. So, Rachel said, setting aside her original notes, shall we have a real conversation now? About what these recordings actually tell us about political messaging versus policy reality. Karoline nodded, her expression shifting from tactical to thoughtful. I think the American people would appreciate that, she replied. And with that simple exchange, what had begun as a standard political interview transformed into something far more valuable, an honest conversation about the gap between public statements and private realities in Washington. The producer's shocked face said it all. This was not how political interviews were supposed to go. Through his headset, he was already getting messages from the network executives, some confused, others excited about the unexpected drama unfolding live. Rachel leaned forward in her chair, her notes now set aside. The careful script she'd prepared had become irrelevant in the face of this new information. Let me make sure I understand correctly, she said. Senator Gordon, while publicly claiming to have evidence that the administration misled Congress, was privately acknowledging that he knew this wasn't true. That's what the recording indicates, Karoline replied. And there are more? Rachel asked. Karoline nodded. Two more relevant to this specific situation. Would you like to hear them? The producer frantically signaled from behind the camera, drawing his finger across his throat, the universal sign to cut. They were supposed to break for commercials 2 minutes ago. Rachel ignored him completely, her journalistic instincts overriding the planned schedule. Yes, I would, she said. Karoline played the second recording. This time it was Senator Gordon again, speaking to what sounded like a group of supporters at a private event. Trust me, his voice rang out clearly. By next month, we'll have them on the defensive about these sanctions. We've got a whole strategy mapped out. A woman's voice asked, but what about the jobs report showing manufacturing growth? We'll just say those numbers are cooked, Gordon replied with a laugh. Who's going to check? Most people just read headlines anyway. As the recording ended, Rachel shook her head slightly. Then, to everyone's surprise, she began to laugh again. Not mockingly, but with a sort of genuine appreciation for the political chess move she'd just witnessed. Well played, Ms. Leavitt, she said. Well played indeed. The camera operators glanced at each other. In all their years working with Rachel Maddow, they'd never seen her react like this. Her interviews were known for their intensity, their seriousness, not for moments of unexpected laughter. You know, Rachel continued, composing herself, most press secretaries would have just denied our allegations or given a carefully worded non-answer. But you brought receipts. Karoline allowed herself a small smile. I believe in dealing with facts, and the fact is, there's often a significant gap between what politicians say publicly and what they know privately. On all sides? Rachel asked pointedly. On all sides, Karoline agreed without hesitation. I'm not claiming moral high ground for my administration. I'm simply addressing this specific accusation with evidence. The producer had given up on trying. To go to commercial, this was live television gold, the kind of authentic moment that couldn't be scripted. You could have released these recordings to any outlet, Rachel observed. Why bring them to an interview you knew would be challenging? Karoline considered the question. Because credibility matters. If we'd just released them, they'd be dismissed as selective editing or taken out of context. I wanted them heard in a forum where they could be questioned and examined. Even knowing I might be skeptical, especially knowing that. Your skepticism gives them more weight when you acknowledge their significance. Rachel nodded slowly, a new respect visible in her expression. That's unusually transparent for Washington. For a moment, both women seemed to forget they were on camera. The calculated performance of political communication fell away, replaced by something rarer, a genuine exchange between two professionals who, despite their differences, shared a commitment to their respective roles. Can I ask, Rachel said, how long you've had these recordings? 3 weeks, Karoline answered. And you waited for this moment to use them? Strategic timing is part of the job, Karoline said with a slight shrug. Just as asking the right hard questions at the right time is part of yours. Rachel laughed, again more softly this time. Touché, she turned to face the camera directly. We need to take a quick break. When we return, we'll continue our conversation with White House Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt, which has taken a, well, let's call it an unexpected turn. As soon as they were clear, the studio erupted in controlled chaos. The producer rushed over to Rachel, speaking quickly and gesturing with his clipboard. What just happened? He asked. This is completely off script. The best interviews usually are, Rachel replied, looking surprisingly relaxed. Get the research team to quickly verify what we can about these recordings, and tell the control room we're changing the format for the second half. Across the set, Karoline was speaking quietly with her aide Lisa. It's going well, Lisa whispered. Better than we expected. Karoline nodded. She's handling it professionally. I thought she might get defensive, or try to discredit the recordings. 3 minutes, called the floor director. As the makeup artists rushed in for touch-ups, Rachel and Karoline caught each other's eyes across the studio. There was a moment of unspoken acknowledgement between them, a recognition that whatever happened next, the usual script had been thrown out the window. When the cameras turned back on, the energy in the studio had shifted. What had begun as an adversarial interview had transformed into something more nuanced, a conversation about the nature of political communication itself. "Welcome back," Rachel said to the camera. "If you're just joining us, we've been speaking with White House Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt, and our conversation has taken a fascinating turn." She looked directly at Karoline. "Let's move beyond Senator Gordon specifically. What do these recordings tell us about the larger issue of political messaging versus policy reality?" Karoline didn't immediately reach for a talking point. Instead, she paused thoughtfully before responding. "They tell us something most Americans already suspect," she said, "that too often there's a gap between what politicians say for public consumption and what they know to be true." It was the beginning of a conversation neither woman had planned for, but one that viewers would remember long after the broadcast ended. The morning after the interview, Leavitt woke up to her phone buzzing nonstop. She grabbed it from her nightstand and squinted at the screen. Hundreds of notifications. Her stomach dropped as she opened the first news alert. White House Press. Secretary's secret recording backfires on live TV. She scrolled through more headlines, each worse than the last. Video clips of Maddow's laughter had gone viral overnight. Late-night hosts were already planning entire segments around it. One headline called it the most awkward moment in political TV this year. Leavitt threw her phone down and buried her face in her pillow. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. The recording was meant to be her moment of triumph, proof of what the president had been saying all along about media bias. Instead, she'd become the punchline. Her phone rang. It was Dave, her deputy. "You've seen the news?" he asked when she picked up. "Hard to miss," Leavitt said, trying to keep her voice steady. "The president wants to see you at 9. She closed her eyes. "I'll be there." The West Wing was unusually quiet when Leavitt arrived. Staff members glanced at her and quickly looked away. In the break room, conversation stopped when she walked in. The president was at his desk when she entered the Oval Office. He didn't look up from his papers. "Sir, about last night," she began. "Sit down," he said, still not looking at her. She sat, hands folded in her lap, waiting. "You went on that show without clearing it with communications," he finally said. "Then you played a recording that made us look desperate and amateur." "Sir," I thought, "that's the problem." He looked up now. "You didn't think. You saw an opportunity to be a hero and jumped without checking how deep the water was." The truth of his words stung. She had been so certain, so eager to prove herself. "Social media is having a field day," he continued. "Our supporters are confused. The press is calling it a stunt. We're on defense now, all because you wanted a viral moment." "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I truly believed the recording would expose their bias." The president sighed, leaning back in his chair. His anger seemed to deflate a bit. "You know what the worst part is? You're good at this job. Really good. You connect with people, you fight for our message. But you're young, and sometimes it shows." The words hurt more than if he'd just fired her on the spot. "What do you want me to do?" she asked. "Fix it. Own the mistake. No excuses." Across town at the same time, Maddow was having breakfast with her executive producer, Chet. "I still can't believe that happened," Chet said, shaking his head as he poured more coffee. "When she pulled out that phone, I nearly had a heart attack in the control room." Maddow smiled faintly. "I wasn't planning to laugh. It just came out." "Well, it worked. The clip has over 5 million views already." Chet scrolled through his phone. Twitter can't get enough of it. But Maddow wasn't celebrating. She stirred her coffee thoughtfully. "What's bothering you?" Chet asked. "This is a win." "Is it, though?" She looked up. "Half the country already thinks we're smug elites who look down on them." My laughing probably confirmed that for a lot of viewers. Come on, you were genuine. Anyone watching could see that. That's not how they'll spin it. Maddow pushed her plate away. The thing is, Leavitt's not wrong that we have biases. Everyone does. The problem was thinking that recording proved some kind of conspiracy. Chet frowned. Don't tell me you feel bad for her. I don't know, Maddow admitted. She's young and way over her head. I remember making plenty of mistakes at her age, just not on national television. By noon, Leavitt was facing a packed press room. Cameras clicked rapidly as she approached the podium. She'd rehearsed what to say, but her mouth felt dry. Before I take questions, she began, I want to address what happened last night on MSNBC. The room fell silent, everyone leaning forward slightly. I made a judgment call that in hindsight was a mistake. The recording I played didn't demonstrate what I believed it did, and playing it without proper context was unprofessional. A reporter raised his hand. Are you saying the recording was fake? No, it was genuine, but it didn't prove what I claimed it did. Two staffers discussing coverage angles isn't the smoking gun I presented it as. Another hand shot up. Will you be resigning? Leavitt took a deep breath. No. The president has expressed his disappointment, and I've learned from this experience. Now I'd like to move on to policy questions. The rest of the briefing was brutal, but she got through it. That evening, Maddow opened her show differently than planned. Last night, something unexpected happened in this studio, she began. White House Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt played what she called a secret recording that she believed proved media bias. My reaction, laughing, has gotten a lot of attention. She paused, choosing her words carefully. I want to be clear about something. I wasn't laughing at Ms. Leavitt personally. I was reacting to the gap between what was promised and what was delivered. But I've been thinking about this all day, and there's something important here worth discussing. The camera pushed in closer. The relationship between any administration and the press is naturally adversarial. That's healthy in a democracy. But we've reached a point where we're not just disagreeing about facts and policies. We're living in completely different realities. That's not healthy. She leaned forward slightly. Earlier today, Ms. Leavitt acknowledged her mistake in how she presented that recording. That took courage. Maybe this bizarre moment can be a tiny first step towards something better than the gotcha politics we've all gotten used to. Late that night, after the worst day of her career, Leavitt sat alone in her apartment scrolling through news coverage. She paused on a clip of Maddow's opening from that evening. She watched it twice, surprised by the measured tone. Her phone buzzed with a text from a number she didn't recognize. Tough day. Been there. This will pass. RM. Leavitt stared at the message for a long time before finally typing back, thanks, needed that. She put her phone down and looked out her window at the Washington Monument lit up against the night sky. Tomorrow would be another battle, but tonight, she allowed herself to acknowledge a simple truth. Sometimes the person you thought was your enemy turns out to be more complicated than that. And sometimes public embarrassment teaches you more than success ever could.